Welcome to Vera Voices, a podcast series by the Vera Institute of Justice. I'm Jennifer Jensen, a senior research associate with the Center on Youth Justice here at Vera, and today I'm talking to Dr. Jamie Fader, assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice, SUNY Albany, and author of the book Falling Back: Incarceration and Transitions to Adulthood Among Urban Youth. So Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your book is about and the research that you did?
The book is about community reentry from reform school and transitions to adulthood among a very vulnerable population. Young Black and Latino men who, by the time they had turned 18, had already spent a spell of time incarcerated. I recruited a group of young men from Philadelphia and incarcerated together and got to know them a little bit, and then they allowed me to follow them back into their communities in Philadelphia. For 3 years, I documented their challenges to reentry and transitions to adulthood, and also their successes.
Now, reentry has been a hot topic issue or a hot button issue over the past 10 years or maybe even more, specifically the collateral consequences of incarceration and the barriers to reentry, especially for adults in the research literature. So what makes your work different in terms of focusing in on youth and their barriers coming home?
Youth reentry has been relatively understudied, and what we do know is that young people's reentry kind of process is a little bit different because they're undergoing two transitions at one time. They're going from facility to community, but they're also moving from adolescence into young adulthood. I also think it's unique because it's one of the only reentry pieces I've read that actually starts in the facility itself. I'm really interested in change processes. I started inside the facility trying to understand how the institution itself was trying to promote change, and was able to gather at that time also the young men's plans for reentry. That allowed me to kind of map out the disjuncture between their plans on the inside and the realities when they came home.
Was it difficult for you to get access to the facilities and to talk to and recruit young men while you were inside the facility?
It's normally a very difficult thing to do. Luckily, I spent a number of years doing program evaluation in Philadelphia and had relationships with the facilities that had contracts there.
Something else that I found really interesting were the detailed stories that you got and the young people's narratives. And I was just wondering, and this is again something as a researcher that in my own work deal with quite often, is that my background is very different from the young people that I might be talking to. And so I was just wondering how you negotiated those relationships, developed the rapport with the young people.
So the first rule of being an ethnographer is that you have to be as non-judgmental as possible. And that's really only developed over time. I think I could feel them testing me sometimes by sharing a little bit of discrediting information, and when I didn't react poorly, they felt like it might be safer to tell me about some other things like getting back into the game. And I think also that I just showed a lot of consistency. If I told them I was going to be there at 8 a.m. to take them to family court, I was there at 8 a.m.
So as you started putting together their stories and their narratives emerged, what was the most interesting finding?
I can think of two things that are really surprising. First thing that was so surprising is that they themselves were surprised to come home and realize that their material circumstances, the opportunities for trouble, had remained unchanged. They felt so changed and had such a strong desire to change that it was a real cold, hard slap to come home and see that all of these same challenges were going to be here. The other really surprising thing, in light of how young men from inner city neighborhoods are portrayed in the popular media and some literature, is how important fatherhood was to them. Being an active father, being a better father than their own fathers had been for them. This was all extremely important to them. To me, it seemed that fatherhood was a way of reinventing themselves. One of them even said, I want to see a part of me that's never been bad.
Did masculinity play a role in that in terms of being a good father?
Masculinity construction is, I think, one of the most important themes that come up looking at their employment opportunities and activities, their fatherhood, and also going back to selling drugs. This idea of finding ways to feel like a man, where you're not doing it in the world of formal legal employment, maybe you can enact a masculine role as a father, and you can kind of make up for that deficit. And I saw many people who saw their only route to feeling like a man as selling drugs, so they wouldn't have to rely on financial contributions from their parents or other women in their lives.
And was falling back a term that they used?
Fallback has kind of several meanings. Fallback might mean to stop drawing attention to yourself. Fallback in this context meant they were going to relax their efforts in criminal activity. I like the term for a couple reasons. One, it suggests how much work selling drugs is. That falling back, living the legal lifestyle is actually easier. But I like it also because what happened when they came home is they fell back into their old ways of solving problems.
So I guess I finally just want to talk about the policy implications of this work. I'm wondering how the findings can produce something that you can bring to policymakers about maybe changing the way that programs are inside residential facilities for young people.
This research adds to existing and growing research that shows how harmful residential facilities for young people can be. These facilities are so far from young people's homes, so far from their loved ones, but most importantly, institutions like that, by definition, have to frame the problem of delinquency as stemming from some sort of individual deficit, usually bad decision making. And when fixing, bad decisions is your main intervention, you're failing to acknowledge all of the other structural sources of offending and structural barriers to healthy transitions to adulthood. These stories illustrate the kind of multiple domains where young people are so vulnerable: housing, employment, family, any kind of stable social support. Single issue reentry programs like finding someone a job or finding someone, housing, it's unlikely to be successful unless they're also coordinating with other agencies who are filling those other needs.
Do you think that there's anything that could have been done in Mountain Ridge that would have maybe enhanced the programming?
I always wondered what would happen if young people inside these facilities were taught to code switch. So much of the effort inside the facility was controlling physical behavior,
right,
and erasing all kind of visible connection to street culture. And that was so stigmatic for young people. And I wonder what would happen if they were told, your way of doing things has worked great in some respects,
right,
because you're alive. You made it to this point in a very dangerous environment. And yet it doesn't translate well to the world of work or the world of school. And so here's another code that you can use that's equally valuable. I've never seen any evidence about it, but I would love to see what would happen if kids were taught how to code switch.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today about your work. We find it so interesting, and we're glad that you were able to come and talk to us, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you very much for having me.